I want to work with the music variables. So again, looking at variable view, you get this group here. You see all these different genres of music, 5-point scales, dislike very much to like very much. Actually, it's like very much to dislike very much, I guess, if you go by the order of the codes. Big band, bluegrass, country, blues, Broadway, classical, etc. You've got all these different types of music. Those variables were only asked about. Those questions were only asked in the 1993 survey. And remember, this data file has data from several years. So actually, before I even do that, I'm going to start with the Analyze menu before I go to the Data menu. This is some really basic stuff. If I go to Analyze Descriptive Statistics Frequencies, I'll get this box that pops up, dialog box or menu. I'm going to expand it just so you can see a little bit more. And you'll see you have all the variables listed here. Now, sometimes these variables, especially like if this box is small, you see, oh, everything looks the same, right? Everything says like or dislike. I can't tell what's what. Now you can expand that or you can hover over it, right? So it'll tell you what's there. A lot of times if I have good variable names, not labels, but the names, that they're already descriptive, just because they're shorter, I'll right click on this and then you have an option. Instead of displaying variable labels, you can display variable names. See, and so now it just says big band, bluegrass, country, blues. I mean, I know what those variables are. So it's like, oh, this is about do they like or dislike gospel music? This is about do they like or dislike opera? And so that's shorter. And actually, when you get to the point where you're creating syntax, which you do not have to get to that point in this class, you can just do stuff through the menus if you want to. But what I'm going to try to encourage you to do is get into the habit of pasting your syntax, because eventually you will get familiar enough with the syntax. And by syntax, I mean it's like code, right? It's like programming code. But you'll get familiar enough with it that you can do things much faster by making some manual changes to the syntax. But I don't want to, force anybody into programming before they're ready. So just know you can use the menus for everything, but if you want to get really good with SPSS, you do eventually have to have some facility with the code, with the syntax. And that, again, does not mean that you have to be able to write it like from memory, just type away. Just being able to modify it, understanding it well enough that you can make small modifications to it. But anyway, I digress. So I'm going to start here with the year variable. Because like I said, we've got 4 years of data, and I want to know how many cases are in this data file and how many from each year. So if I click on year and I click that over, now if I just click OK, SPSS will run this. But like I said, I want to get you into the habit of creating syntax and working with syntax, because in the long run, you will be a much more powerful SPSS user if you're able to do that. But like I said, if you click OK, it'll do it. I'm going to click paste. And when I click paste, SPSS creates, or I should say it opens up another window. This is what we call the syntax editor. And syntax editor contains syntax files. And so the default name for a new syntax file is syntax1. If you save it, it will be saved with the extension .sps. So we have .sav or data files, .sps or syntax files, and in a moment you will see output files, which are .spv. The V stands for viewer. I think it's SPSS viewer. But you might notice that when I clicked paste, SPSS created this syntax in the first line. Well, it's in line 2, but it's the first line of code we have here. Dataset activate dataset 1. Well, the name of our file is GSS 87, 88, 89, 93, right? But that's a permanent data file. That's saved somewhere. When you open up the data file, SPSS will treat that file as sort of like there's a temporary version of it that's open. And it will designate that file, since it's the first one we open. That's dataset 1. I could open another SPSS data file without closing that one, and then SPSS would designate that dataset 2. And so then I could run different things on multiple data files more or less simultaneously. For now, I would say don't do that. Try to keep it one at a time for the moment. But that's what that dataset 1 is about. And if you have, whoops, don't want to do that. If you have multiple data files open, you also have this option under active. If you had multiple files, you could use this drop down and you could tell SPSS, I want to run this procedure on that data file, not the other one. Right now we only have one open, so that's all we have to worry about, but I wanted to point that out. Now this is the syntax that was generated for the request that I made. I said analyze descriptive statistics frequencies, and I wanted the frequencies for year, and so this is what it output with the default option of ordering it by order equals analysis means by the order of the categories in the data file. If I highlight all of this, now I can either hit this play button here, which you'll see if I hover over it, it says run selection, or I can go to the run menu and say run selection, or since it's the only thing I have in here, if I just didn't highlight it, I could say run all. So I'll do run all for now. And you'll see that SPSS opened yet another window, right? We had the data file, the data editor, they call it. We have the syntax editor, and now this is the statistics viewer. So if I click on or I hover over my SPSS icon in the menu along the bottom, or I guess what do they call it, the tray. Here are the three windows, right? Here's output, there's the data file, there's the syntax. They're all there. So I've got one program open, but it's got three windows. So I ran the syntax on the data file, and it told me this. The GSS year for the respondent. So it tells me I have 1,819 records from 1987, 1,481 from 1988, 1,537 from 1989, and 1,606 from 1993. In total, 6,443 records. And then it breaks it up into percentages. Now you also get this cumulative percent column, which if there were any difference between percent and valid percent, it would base it on valid percent. And the only difference between percent and valid percent would be if you had any missing data. So you'll see that again eventually in this module. But right now, there's no missing data on year, so these two are the same. But so this tells me 51.2% of the records are from 1988 or earlier, essentially. Now, as I said, we are going to start by playing around with the music variables, and they are only from 1993. So to keep things simple and not to have all this missing data in my analysis that is missing only because, well, they didn't ask about that stuff in the other years, I want to filter this file. So I'm coming back to the data view. I want to filter this file for 1993 only. And now, as I said earlier, we will go to the data menu. And so under the data menu, there's an option here. It says select cases. And remember, cases are rows. Again, I'm going to right-click here and change this to display variable names. And I've got the year variable here that I'm going to look at. Now, right now, by default, SPSS is selecting all cases. It's using everything that is in the data file. We're going to change this to if condition is satisfied. And the if condition, if I click on if, will bring me over here. I'm going to say if year equals 1993. And I mean, you could use these buttons here to do that as well. I just typed it in with my keyboard. I'll click continue. Make sure before you do the next step that under output, it's on filter out unselected cases. You definitely do not want to delete unselected cases. There will be times when you might want to do that. But here, we just want to limit the file to 1993 cases for the analysis that we're doing now. But we don't want to get rid of the other records. We're going to need them later. If you filter them out, then SPSS essentially turns those records off, but they're still available to you. Again, if you click OK, it'll just do it. But I want you to get used to doing this. Again, this is what I would consider a best practice. Click Paste. Come over to your syntax window, and you'll see here is the syntax that SPSS created by us using the menus. I'm highlighting it. I'm going to click the play button to run the selection. Again, I could come up here and say run selection, but I kind of like using the play button. And you might notice that the viewer, it's not just an output window. It's like, here's the output from the query that we submitted, right? But here, there's no output from doing a data selection procedure, but it does capture the syntax that was run. One of the reasons why I want you to do paste syntax and then run it is that it creates a record of what you've done. So you can always go back and look. If something goes wrong, you can look and see where did it go wrong. The other big reason, well, one of the other reasons was what I said earlier, that if you gain facility with the syntax, it will make you a much more powerful and especially faster user of SPSS. But the other big reason is you may have many, many steps in what you're doing in SPSS. And it's not uncommon to make a mistake. And if you make a mistake in step 2 and you get to step 27, everything from step 3 on is wrong. And if you've just been clicking through the menus, you're going to have to go through, click through all the menus for those steps 3 through 27 all over again. If instead you've been pasting your syntax and you find out there was a mistake in step 2, you just update the syntax for step 2 and you rerun the whole thing, and you don't have to point and click through everything all over again. So it will, I mean, I guess it's part and parcel of being faster, but I mean, it will allow you that flexibility to make a mistake without having to basically do all your work again, because you're just going to make SPSS do the work again. And it's just a smarter way to do it. So coming back over here, here's the data file. What's new? Well, what you'll see here is that everything that's not 1993 now has this slash line through it. It's still here, but we're not using it. It's turned off. If I scroll down, when I get to the 1993 records, you'll see these are left on because those are the records that we will be using, right? Those are the cases that we're using. And so now we are prepared to move on to do our analysis with the musical variables. This video is starting to get kind of long though, so I'm going to stop here, give you a little bit of a break, and then when we come back, we will start the analysis on the 1993 musical preferences data.